enhance and sustain water quality in Beaver Lake and the integrity of its watershed. We do that through education and outreach, technical assistance to landowners and communities, and planning and analysis activities. The Beaver Lake watershed is also located in the Ozark Highlands and Boston Mountains of northwest Arkansas. It's primarily forested, almost 70%, 21% pasture, and about 6% urban. And this watershed is also in the headwaters of the upper White River Basin. So what happens here in the Beaver Lake watershed flows on to Table Rock Lake, then to Bull Shoals, and on over to the Mississippi River, which eventually goes down to the Gulf of Mexico. The Alliance is primarily focused on basically the waters draining to Beaver Lake. So Beaver Lake's located here on the northern end of the watershed. So we're really focusing on these sub-watershed areas that are all flowing into Beaver Lake. And this lake is really important because it is a drinking water source. It serves over 500,000 people in northwest Arkansas. It's also a source of hydroelectric power and generates quite a bit of recreation and tourism dollars to the region. And as we see it, is a cornerstone of community growth and economic development in northwest Arkansas. Now, the Alliance is guided by and facilitates the Beaver Lake Watershed Protection Strategy, which is a 9-element US EPA accepted plan. And this strategy was put in place back in 2009 and is undergoing an update this year. But there's 3 overarching goals, and that is to 1, maintain a long-term high-quality drinking water supply, to 2, restore water quality of impaired stream and lake areas, and 3, minimize additional costs and regulations for people living and working in the watershed. Well, based on the current Beaver Lake Watershed Protection Strategy, our primary focus is right now currently around Beaver Lake itself, we call the lakeside, the lower White River or the riverine area, as we call it, and the West Fork watershed area, closely followed by the War Eagle watershed. So our primary objectives are to reduce sediment and nutrients going into these tributaries that eventually reaches Beaver Lake. And typical sources of that are stream bank erosion, like you see the photos at the bottom, unpaved roads, and construction site runoff. The Alliance has also been working over the past 10 years to look at solutions to reduce non-point source pollutants, things like low impact development, agricultural practices, forestry management practices, in-stream work, and riparian area work. So we work with a lot of partners to study and implement these non-point source projects to help reduce those inputs. So last year we had a focus to start looking at our own metrics and looking at the past 10 years. I'm going to share some numbers with you all. That includes general education and outreach. We've reached over 44,000 people to educate and talk about watershed management. So this is really important to talk about the issues, talk about the challenges, but also talk about solutions. We've also looked at best management practices and what all has been accomplished over the past 10 years. So you can see here on the right, numbers have been tabulated for some different practices like forest enhancement, riparian enhancement, trees planted, invasives removed, pasture renovated, and we've worked over along 167 miles of waterways. Now, watershed management also has a value back to communities. So over the past 10 years, we've been able to contribute over $1 million in community service back to the Northwest Arkansas area. We've also conducted research and scientific studies to look at land management practices like rain gardens, ponds, and pasture aeration, just a couple examples here, to start really looking at what are the reduction capabilities of these practices in the watershed. And we've also looked at a parcel level analysis a little more closer. So looking at where are we engaging with landowners, like you can see in the War Eagle and the West Fork watershed areas, we're primarily working with forested, um, pasture, and streamside landowners in those areas, whereas in like the lakeside sub-watersheds, we might be working more with residential landowners. So this really helps us understand the relationship between landowner engagement and sub-watershed and land use. We'd like to also share a watershed success. Recently, over 21 river miles have been removed from the state's 303D list of impaired waterways. Thanks to the Arkansas Water Resources Center and their sampling efforts, they were able to provide some valuable information to our state agencies to help divide a segment of the West Fork White River on this 303D list. Watershed success metrics are really supportive of an adaptive watershed management approach, and they're also really complementary to the Beaver Lake Watershed Protection Strategy update that's happening now. So we're inviting you all today to help us take a look at how we measure watershed success. And we do want to just keep in mind that, we know water quality parameters are out there and those are established. So we want to just add to that and build on those to look at the other pieces and parts of metrics that complement and can help achieve water quality goals to show an overall watershed health picture. And we really see these metrics as, well, internally for the Alliance, this is going to be a benchmark tool for us to utilize and communicate internally, but also a really powerful communication tool um, to work with landowners and cities to show the overall impacts and how we're working together to achieve watershed health. So there's internal level uses, but also external level uses. And we also see these as not only being a tool for the Beaver Lake watershed, but also other watershed areas in the state or beyond. So we want this to be scalable and adaptable to help out other communities. And based on our three primary activities, we've identified drivers for these metrics. So just as a starting point, we see education and outreach activities, the main driver being a cohesive stakeholder engagement. So having dialogue about watershed issues and challenges and those solutions are important. Technical assistance and BMP implementation, we see the driver of that is really water quality improvement. So we want to see change over time on reduced sediment and nutrients going into our waterways. And for planning and analysis, we really see the driver of that being long-term strategies and how we're going to ensure that Beaver Lake is a long-term, high-quality source drinking water supply for the region. So before we get into today's presentations, I just want to take a minute and thank our staff. They really are the boots on the ground, helping get out there and work with landowners and communities every day. Thank you to our staff and all that you do. I also want to thank our board of directors that really guides and steers the Alliance efforts. And I also want to thank our partners because great partners do equal clean water. We appreciate those that financially support us, but also those that support us through their in-kind contributions, like their expertise or participating and coordinating with us on the many activities that we do throughout the year. So we just want to say thank you to all of our partners and sponsors. So here's how you can contact us. After the program or anytime, you can engage with us by emailing us, calling us. We are undergoing a website update, which should be out in the next week or so. And we also have moved to a new office in Elkins, Arkansas. We're now located on the White River. We are on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and catch a We Are Water podcast. So we want to thank everybody today for your time to join us for this quarterly speaker series. And I look forward to the presentations and engaging with you all on these initial steps for watershed success metrics development. Thank you.
Okay. So next I'd like to introduce Dr. Sarah Lewis, and she's just going to say a few words. Dr. Sarah Lewis has been helping as a consultant, and she is a sustainability leadership coach and consultant with a focus on helping sustainability-minded professionals and organizations reach their highest aspirations. She's really passionate about reconnecting humans and the environment. She's a leader in the field of sustainability, and she's on the board of directors for the Watershed Conservation Resource Center and Arkansas United. Let's see. And Sarah is an active and recognized leader in her community, where she served a 4-year term as an elected official on the Fayetteville, Arkansas City Council, passing numerous policies related to watershed protection. She's most passionate about her role as a mama to get her son Isaac, and works to create works where he and others can thrive in the future. So thank you, Sarah, so much for being here today. I'm going to pull up your slide.
Okay, thank you so much, Becky. And everyone, thank you for being here and for your interest and all that you do to protect water and watersheds. So it's such a fantastic opportunity to be part of this team, this fantastic team leading this work. And I wanted to highlight some perspectives from just having worked in this space for quite a while, and certainly I come to it with my own personal passion as well. It's been water, and actually I have a deep connection with a heron that led me in the process of learning more about streams in the Ozarks years ago when I was teaching 8th graders science, and took them out to the creek to learn about urban sprawl and how we can work together with our creeks and streams to maintain their health and quality while we also have our communities and we work together. So one of the things I want to highlight are kind of 3 areas that I feel like really make this project in particular unique and really demonstrate leadership on the part of the Beaver Watershed Alliance. Many of you are, you're so familiar with the work already, but just to highlight some of the aspects of it, certainly having the strategy in place and having watershed management plans in place, all of that is so important in the work of a watershed partnership, and the stakeholder engagement piece and having partnerships, key partnerships. The unique aspect of this work comes really in 3 parts, and it relates first to the measuring of the progress towards the mission. So it's one thing to manage the watershed and taking care of the ecosystems, making sure the water quality meets standards. This goes above and beyond that, and looking at what is the vision that we're trying to create in having this watershed partnership and this alliance. What is what are we trying to create? What's the world that we're trying to create? What is our vision and our mission? And Beaver Watershed Alliance has that. And what's our impact? How are we ultimately impacting change, and how are we reaching our goals? And that's what this project does, is to really assess the success of the Alliance in reaching their mission. And that is just something truly to celebrate. We just don't see that very often around the world in Watershed, just let alone having a Watershed Alliance in place, but also measuring the progress towards the mission is that additional level of maturation, I think, in this team, in this organization. It's really something to celebrate. The other piece that I'll call out that really inspires me about this work is that it's filling a gap. It's filling a gap globally, where it's looking at taking a whole watershed sustainability strategy approach and looking at how successful is this watershed in partnering, in outreach, in the science and the metrics and the standards. How successful is and cohesive is this community in taking care of this watershed in which they live and exist. And you see this could potentially being used by companies, for example, or communities, to determine whether or not to source product from an area, or to invest in facilities, or invest in living in an area. You can imagine people invest in, deciding if they're coming to a region. You saw the numbers on, well, you've seen the numbers, I'm sure, on the number of people coming to Northwest Arkansas. Our water supply is a key aspect of that. And for companies, I worked a lot with companies over the years, and they are making decisions on how to source and where to site their facilities, depending on how successful the water issues are in that area. And having clarity and the ability of a watershed partnership and alliance to really collaborate and have a good connection with their goals and their vision is a great way to differentiate our region even from other areas. And then the last part I'll highlight is something that many of us are very familiar with. Anytime there is a limited amount of resources, there are a couple of different ways that things can go. It can become very competitive and adversarial, or it can become very collaborative and cohesive. And what I'm just observing in this team and this group of people is a spirit of collaboration and cohesion, and it's truly something to celebrate, and something that I hope can grow and expand in this region as well as worldwide. It's such an important part of protecting our water supply and the habitat and the ecosystems that support that water supply. So thank you so much for being a part of creating that culture of collaboration for this work, as well as the other work that Beaver Watershed Alliance does. It takes a purposeful intention to do that, and to really think about, I hope as we go into this work, we'll think about, certainly Beaver Watershed Alliance is administering this. We're working on it directly, and it's intended to be the work of all of us. And that's what the process is intended for, that we'll be sharing with you. It's intended to be open and collaborative, and a chance to be a part of building these metrics for success, working towards assessing our impact towards the overall mission. And we want you to be a part of it and feel like it's your own, and think about how even it could be applied. If you work with another alliance or watershed partnership somewhere, maybe this can be used for the work that is done through that group as well. So please keep that in mind as we work together and learn more about where we are at this point, and then as we go through the whole process. So thank you, Becky, and thank you to the Beaver Watershed Alliance team and Erin as well for getting to be a part of this. So I'll hand it back over to you, Becky.
Thank you, Sarah. We're so fortunate to have you on the team here, really to come at it from that 30,000 level and share your thoughts and guide this
Thank
effort
you.
as well. So thank you. Okay, and we are also fortunate to have the Arkansas Water Resources Center helping to develop this framework. Up next, we have Erin Grantz. She's a program manager with the Arkansas Water Resources Center. Erin has been with the University of Arkansas System Division of Agriculture since 2011. She came to AWRC in 2020. She completed a Master of Science degree in Crop Soil Environmental Science at the University of Arkansas in 2010 and is currently working towards a PhD in environmental dynamics. Erin's hobbies include exploring the great Arkansas outdoors and family time with her husband and 3 children. So thank you, Erin, for being here, and we'll hand it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, so give me a minute. Okay, thank you for that introduction. It's been very exciting to be part of this project. Okay, so to start today, I would just like to dive in with the concept of a vision and the question of what makes a watershed sustainable. And I'm going to get you all involved right away because I want you to just think about that, and then just what pops into your head immediately within the first few seconds. Okay, so what's your vision? You may be like me as a lover of our amazing outdoor resources in this region. I immediately think of beautiful scenery, great places to recreate, and even I think about the unique and fascinating species that our waters and adjacent lands are home to. But of course, that's not the only way to view this, and there are other perspectives that are equally important. This question might call to mind, for example, images that invoke pride in making a living off the land and preserving way of life for generations to come. Others here may have a particular interest in low impact development and green infrastructure and how that relates to our urbanization in the area. And still others may think of the unprecedented growth we've had in our region and how important that is for ensuring quality of life for our citizens. So the word here is multifaceted. Maybe you thought of all those things. And we certainly can't approach quantifying what makes a watershed sustainable without keeping that in mind. There's another important aspect as well. These are 2 diagrams, and don't get too involved with them. They're very complex. I'm not going to go into great detail with them, but these are things that came up in the brainstorming process of, what does it mean? There are already some ideas out there about how watershed sustainability works. The one on the left is from the perspective of public health. The one on the right is probably a little bit closer to what we're doing here, but it's very specific to British Columbia. So we probably won't be considering salmon populations in our framework. So that just sort of highlights, that the need for us to do something that's a little more specific to us here in Northwest Arkansas. Really just what I wanted you to take away from these is that the other really key aspect here is that all these multifaceted things are also interconnected. Okay, one of the things that we did just to launch this process is ask Beaver Watershed Alliance's technical committee to help us brainstorm using mental models. And this is what a mental model looks like at the end of a session. Again, lots and lots of arrows, lots and lots of interconnected things. I won't be walking you through where all these arrows go and what they all mean, The point that I'd like to make here is that in reviewing these materials from outside sources and then getting input from the technical committee, there are things that are common things that start to emerge, and that tells us those are the things that we want to focus on, we want to make sure come out in what our end product is. So just for example, forest, urban development, stormwater, erosion, riparian zones, which is the area adjacent to the stream, runoff. Oh, I think I've got that blocked. Ordinance and regulations, wetlands, best management practices. Okay, and then this is another one of the mental models that came out of this. It has a few more things I just want to highlight, including stakeholders' interest, get regulations, and then clean water, which has a very prominent placement, as it should. It's very much in line also with Beaver Watershed Alliance's mission. Okay, so we as a team settled on what we thought was a sustainable watershed vision, trying to incorporate all these different threads. So not surprisingly, first and foremost, high quality and sufficient water supply for today and the future. Natural land cover, so think forests, wetlands, present at levels that protect ecosystem function. Ecologically conscious development to mitigate risk to ecosystem function. Runoff and erosion managed to minimize downstream degradation. Corporate and agricultural stewardship. Regulation that is targeted, appropriate, and effective. Watershed processes are well understood. And environmental equity, inclusion, and social justice. So that was 8 things, and that might be kind of a lot. So we wanted to sort of hone in on just even down another level on commonalities. And so part of this initial review process was to look at the US EPA recovery potential screening tool for watersheds. It's not an exact fit here because it's really a tool for people to compare watersheds to see which has the greatest recovery potential and would be the best investment. So that's not what we're trying to do here. But their approach to measuring recovery potential has 3 pillars that they divide everything up by. The social, the ecological, and stressor, which here we're going to call mitigation. So we realized that the sustainable watershed vision statements are all have aspects of each of these pillars. So this could be a useful way to sort of drill down further. And so we have those here: social, ecological, and mitigation. And then we made goals or desired outcomes for each one. So we're going to have 3 desired outcomes. The first is public and policy prioritization of healthy watersheds. The second mitigation pillar is resilient, non-degrading human footprint. And the third ecological pillar is intact and functional ecological systems. Okay, you may be thinking, that sounds great. How do we do it? So the next phase of this process is to identify drivers and answer this question of how do we get to watershed sustainability? So drivers are actions that drive progress towards a desired outcome. That's sort of, your cut and dried definition. But another important perspective is that these are also opportunities. So these are opportunities for Beaver Watershed Alliance or any watershed group to have an impact on watershed sustainability. Okay, and then just moving forward into what we've come up with, we also organized the drivers that we identified as important, separate as social, mitigation, or ecological. So that's how I'm going to present them in the next few slides. Okay, so for our first outcome, our social pillar outcome, public and policy prioritization of healthy watersheds. These are the key drivers that we identified for a watershed group. First, education and outreach, community building, target audience surveys, collaboration among watershed initiatives, and addressing knowledge gaps. For the mitigation pillar, where our desired outcome is resilient, non-degrading human footprint, we identified as the key drivers for a watershed group to be best management practices, urban forestry, low impact development and green infrastructure, and infrastructure retrofits and upgrades. These drivers address the economic component of sustainability by laying out a plan for how we can continue to use watershed resources while minimizing adverse effects that can come with development that is not ecologically conscious. Okay, and for our third ecological pillar, the desired outcome is intact and functional ecological systems. And we identified the key drivers for a watershed group to be land conservation, high value and sensitive ecosystem preservation, ecosystem restorations, and synergisms in the ecological protection that is provided by the first three. Another way of putting it is that the activities of the first three could be more than the sum of their parts. And if they're done in well thought out ways, they can come together to maximize benefit. So these drivers address the reality that a watershed cannot be completely developed and maintain the ecosystem functions that we need for clean drinking water, to recreate safely, to preserve culture, or to save space for our non-human watershed neighbors. Okay, the next section is focusing on indicators and metrics. And so this is to answer the question of how do we know if we're making progress. So indicators are how we track progress. They're the signal of change in drivers of watershed sustainability. And there are metrics associated with them that they're going to be the way that those changes are measured. So we have worked out an entire framework with suggested indicators and metrics, but I'd really like to call out here that there is more than one way to measure most indicators. So a part of this process that BWA and all of us would really like you to be involved with is figuring out what is the best approach, what communicates most effectively, what's easiest to understand, what really gets to the heart of what is trying to be expressed. Okay, so I'm going to walk through what we laid out as social indicators in our framework. Again, we're still following that pattern of separating things by social, mitigation, and ecological. Okay, so the first two indicators, events, workshops, and trainings, media creation and distribution. This is just the bread and butter for Beaver Watershed Alliance. And so throughout this, there'll be arrows sort of connecting what we have here on the left as drivers, and then on the right being the indicators. So this is something that Beaver Watershed Alliance is already tracking in terms of how much they do, who they reach, how big their audience is, and maybe to add to that, different keeping track of the different types of events or media could maybe add to that. Collaboration diversity and decision maker legislative support. These indicators may be tracked as the different types of stakeholders that are involved on boards or committees, also different levels of government or branches of government where there are advocates or that have been, that the Alliance has made connections with. For target audience surveys, the goal there and the indicator of would be scores that express the attitudes, knowledge, adoption rates, potentially adoptions to barriers to adoptions of the target audience. Multi-initiative projects and watershed vision. This relates to collaboration among watersheds. This would potentially be measured as presence or absence, or if there are collaborations, the number of projects that are collaborative. And finally, addressing knowledge gaps. 3 indicators here are staff continuing education to address knowledge gaps from within and support, give staff the support they need to carry out the rest of the mission. Watershed monitoring, which Beaver Watershed Alliance already, sorry, not Beaver Watershed Alliance, but that is carried out with partnering groups in the watershed already, to keep an eye on water quality conditions. This would also be really important as baseline information if tracking water quality endpoints were an indicator that you wanted to use. And then finally, technical support engagements, such as with universities, consulting groups, to address greater watershed concerns and questions. Mitigation indicators is up next. So starting out, we have, this is a big one where the funding opportunities that are leveraged makes all the difference for what a watershed group can do. This also projects and installations in terms of the number, different types. And those are things that Beaver Watershed Alliance already, I think, is really on top of. But sort of some new perspectives to look at it that are a little more complex, that might require additional investment, would be to determine the watershed area or river segments in acres, miles that stand to see benefit from different projects. And then also using models to determine estimates of nutrient, sediment, or peak flow reduction. Adding to these indicators is anti-degradation ordinances incentives. This could be, again, a presence absence thing, or looking at how many municipalities or other entities in the area have these. Canopy cover maintained or trees planted. This is linked to urban forestry and is really kind of suggested within an urban environment, because canopy cover is sort of the measure of the benefit of trees within urban areas. And lastly, for infrastructure retrofits and upgrades, this is referring to a lot of different possible things that are important in Beaver Watershed Alliance's mission, including sewer system upgrades, such as including municipal, but really focused on septic systems, rural road improvements, and then projects that manage stormwater. Okay, and lastly, let's take a look at the indicators suggested for the ecological pillar. So conservation programs and easements and forested land and wetlands, this really relates to pretty much any of the drivers. And these can be tracked in terms of, the acres or the watershed area that stands to see improvement due to the changes. And then on a more long-term basis, also keeping track of our forested lands and maybe to a lesser extent, what wetlands we have left in the watershed. The next three that are listed are riparian zone buffer ordinances, hydrologically sensitive area protections, and nature preserves. So these are really related more to the idea that there are some watershed areas that potentially just need to be almost, largely left alone because they present a higher risk of degradation, or having them be high quality gives you more bang for your buck in protecting valued ecosystem properties. These are, so again, these could be measured as the number of projects or areas, the area or stream miles protected. Also, if in some cases, if there are sensitive or rare species present, that could also be part of the quantification process. For ecosystem restoration, this primarily would be focused on stream banks and aquatic barrier removal. Again, measured as number of projects or the area or stream miles protected. And finally, just one of the most powerful measures of the synergy of efforts related to conservation, preservation, and restoration is to quantify the connectivity of what you're protecting, because the different ways in which the protected areas are connected can have more or less benefit for things like wildlife. Okay, so you've probably heard me saying a lot about things that sound like counting: number of projects, participants, products, funds, acres. And so I wanted to spend some time talking about metrics that go beyond counting, because I think this idea is going to be really powerful for the idea of measuring watershed success. So the first thing is that we want to capture trajectory over time with anything we're looking at. Okay, and then also a huge part of measuring your progress is target setting. So there's kind of two ways to look at this. There are some of these indicators are a lot more qualitative. It's really hard to put a specific number on the example for the number of watershed initiative collaborations that equals better water quality. So in this case, there's the option of looking at other watershed partnerships that are perhaps a model or who have demonstrated water quality improvements for goal setting. And then once you have your goal, to quantify everything you do in terms of % of the target. And then for things that are more quantitative, there can be comparisons with threshold values that are associated with ecosystem integrity or decline. A big example here would be the watershed forested land percentage. We know that for the Upper White that threshold somewhere in the range of 40 to 60% forested for sites that are monitored are associated with changes in water quality. And then there's always the option of tracking water quality economic and social endpoints, such as peak flow reduction and sediment load reduction estimates. And then finally, throughout all of this, the equity, inclusion, social justice objectives can be integrated by looking at investment, implementation rates, and participation of underserved groups, such as something for urban forestry is the tree equity score. I just wanted to give us an example. Okay, finally, so I've given this all in pieces, but it ultimately all fits together, and this is what that looks like. The vision is at the center with the 3 pillar outcomes orbiting. The squares contain the drivers for each pillar component. On the diagram, we do not have indicators and metrics because we're trying to keep it not at a certain busyness level, but that may be something for the future to get it all into one diagram. And then finally, we have this in a rubric format, and I do not expect you to be able to read this, but I wanted to flash it up there because this is what you're going to go into and review and provide feedback on. So it has everything laid out with the vision and the 3 outcomes in the columns, and then drivers and indicators and metrics underneath that. Okay, and with that, I would wrap things up, see if there are any questions, and then just want to remind everybody to use the Jamboard if you do have comments.
Well, thank you, Erin. Thank you for taking something very complex and explaining that with us all. We really appreciate that. Great job. And thanks again to Sarah. Thank you so much again for your support and leadership on this project. So for next steps, we just want to remind everybody that what you saw today is draft 1. So we're going to go through this process together and invite you to upcoming workshops, deadlines, things like that. I'll pull up a quick schedule. Let's see, actually not that. For some upcoming workshops. Let's see if I can pull this up quickly here. Okay, so if you can see this here, so we're looking to have comments on this draft 1 framework coming up into February. Then we're going to host some additional open workshops for folks, not quite as formal as today, a little more informal gatherings. And if you know other people that would be interested in helping with this project, we invite you to invite them to join us for these. So we'll announce dates and how to join these upcoming open workshops. And then by around end of May, we'd like to have a sturdy framework with a consensus and input from everybody to help roll out this watershed success metrics framework. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we really like to just open it up for any discussion at this point. If anybody has any initial ideas or questions, comments, things like that. And you could either unmute yourself and
I have one question, Becky.
Yeah. Hey, Bob.
I don't recognize all the names that are here, but are any of the people that are on this session involved with the consulting firm that's doing the watershed protection update?
They are not on today's call. The Research Triangle Institute.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're on there. Okay. They probably need to get a very specific invitation to be part of it.
Yes. And that will be, I think we're going to meet with them in March together with the technical committee and the metrics team.
Okay.
Yeah, since those two things go hand in hand, we certainly want to have those folks in the room.
Becky, this is Sarah. How can people contribute comment and questions on the process?
For today, or do you mean through the commenting period?
Through the commenting period. Now,
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, this is considered what we call it draft 1. So Erin did a beautiful job of just describing what's been created to really bring forward an organized draft for everyone to kind of chew on, basically. So how can everyone kind of jump in from here?
Sure. So I just put a link in the chat And that's going to take you to a folder where this diagram that Erin went through and the rubric draft 1 is going to be in there. And that's how folks can leave comments on draft 1. So today is just really initially a kickoff meeting and just to get the initial feedback from anyone. But yes, that folder that was just shared in the chat, that's going to stay there throughout the process over the next few months to build on there. Yes, I saw one question in the chat was, yes, this will be available on YouTube, and we will also, we can also share a PowerPoint PDF with everyone as well. No problem.
Becky, would it be okay if I describe the process a little bit?
Oh, sure.
Kind of the mechanics of it? Okay. Just so it was mentioned, and Becky outlined the dates to kind of describe how we as a team are thinking about and are planning to run the process is, so here, this is draft 1. It's available to you, make comments, ask questions. We do ask that you share your name as part of your comment. That would help us reach out to you to clarify. It also creates a bit of transparency so people feel like this is an open community, and you know, if someone sees you commented, they might see, you know, feel like inspired to also comment, but also it just creates an openness, a feeling of that cohesion and collaboration that we're trying to create. In the period of time of a comment, it's in the commenting period, please provide your comments. And then as a team with Erin's lead, we will be integrating those comments, and the intention is that every single comment will be addressed. Now, it doesn't mean that every comment can kind of, maybe it doesn't work exactly, but either way it will be addressed, and an explanation on kind of, or maybe a question on how could this work in. But the intention is that every single comment will be considered as a way of making changes, rewording, and wordsmithing is totally open here. Is totally an option. And then we'll bring it back to you and to the community to say, here's the draft 2. And then we'll have a comment period, comments collected, integrate those comments, and then maintain that original draft. So you can always see kind of where we came from and show an updated version then. And we'll do that then 3, probably 4 times with the idea that, you know, as we get closer to the end, we're closer to kind of a final usable framework that can be living, you know, as we evolve as an alliance and as a partnerships across the region, you know, changes can always be made, but something that then can begin to be used and tried out, and you could call it prototyped or whatever we want to call it, but to a point where it's ready to be tried out, and we can start to use it to assess progress and success towards the mission. So it's an exciting process, and I think it's one certainly I've seen work very well, and in building a collaborative approach to this. I hope you'll jump right in. Thank you, Becky.
Yes. Thank you for further explaining that process. Well, we do realize that this was a lot today, and so we just want to thank everybody's time today to join this kickoff meeting. And we will be sending out a follow-up email with these links and copies of today's presentation and ways to engage throughout this process. So keep an eye out for that. Otherwise, again, we want to thank our guest speakers and everyone that's joined today. We really appreciate your time. So Sarah or Erin, anything else from today?
No, thank you for your leadership, Becky, and for everyone's part in this. Thanks so much. And yes, thank you, Leaf. I see a note in the chat.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, well, we will wrap up for today then, and look forward to following up with you all.
Bye.